Let's be honest, the hardest part about being a digital product designer is not actually the design work. It's actually the delivery, the documentation, the communication, and the handoff of that design work to your engineering and development teams. And there's a lot of different ways that people do this, but the two most popular is to use Figma's Dev Mode or to use a tool like Zeplin. And so in today's episode, we're going to break down the differences between Dev Mode and Zeplin to figure out which one is the right tool and process for you. Before we get too far in the weeds and too technical, let me give you a basic overview of how these tools are somewhat similar, and really they're both trying to accomplish the same three things. Number one, they're trying to make delivery between design and development easier. Number two, they're trying to make communication between designers and developers easier. And number three, they're trying to help you establish process within your team. So with that said, let's take a look at Figma's Dev Mode, which is nothing more than a way for developers to come into a Figma file without having to deal with all of the design interface and all of the design capabilities. Developers don't want to have to change colors, move layers around, care about the layers panel, and do all the effects and all the different prototyping things. They just want to see what they need to see as a developer, and that's what Fig Mode is doing. It's a space for developers to work without having to leave and use another tool. And it totes that you can inspect things like grabbing all the measurements and sizes of the design. You can come in and get relevant code snippets for Swift and CSS and React and all that good stuff. It locks into a developer's tech stack, so they can actually connect it with GitHub and Anima and Jira and Storybook, and they can even include it and integrate it into Visual Studio Code, which is the primary tool for developers, which the IDE that a large majority of developers actually use. On the flip side, you have Zeplin, which is all, again, trying to accomplish those three things: delivery, communication, and process. And they have a lot of other features like version control, user flows, design systems, sign-off, management, all that kind of stuff. And if you scroll down, they're even saying they have more features than Dev Mode at half the price. Again, it's a communication intent, they're saying. You can separate what's ready to build between what's not ready to be built. You can manage changes and organize things in a standardized way. And they have an entire process laid out. Now, that is what is the same. Again, delivery, communication, and process. Both tools are trying to establish that process. The difference here, as Zeplin has laid it out, is actually the price. And so if we go over and take a look at Figma's pricing page, for a developer to actually interact with Dev Mode and be able to work in that ecosystem, it's going to be $12 a month. They have to be on the professional plan, whereas over at Zeplin's pricing, they only need to have a $6 a month seat for them to access any of the stuff they're working on. So again, there's the similarities. There's some of the slight differences in price. Now we're going to dive in and get more technical and show you how these two platforms operate and how you might want to use either one of them in your team and in your process. The first main difference between these two platforms is how they're addressing the idea of a single source of truth. Single source of truth just means what's the most updated file and what should my developers be working on. Anybody that's designed for more than 5 minutes knows what it feels like to title a file final version, only to come back later and hit it again and call it final v2. And that's because it's very easy to lose track of what's the most up to date and what our developers should be working on. And the worst thing you could do there is create double work, to do work that you have to go back then and redo later because you were working on the wrong file or off of wrong source of truth. Let's jump into Figma and look at how they are going to approach this idea inside of Dev Mode. I have a file I've been working on, and you can see there I've put all of my artboards inside of sections, and I've labeled all of those sections as ready for dev. I'm actually going to grab one of these and I'm going to remove the ready status. So you can see 1000 is not ready for development. When my developers come in, you can see that over here in the left-hand panel, they're not going to see 1000. It's going to skip it because it's not ready for dev. And this is how they are addressing this idea. So they can come in here and not worry about layers, but instead just click on the elements they need to look at, like onboarding number 5, or jump over to the learn section, and it's going to move them right into the file, and they're going to get all of the relevant information in the right-hand panel. They're going to get all of their code snippets, the box model, all the assets, the variables, and the colors they need to use. And simply by marking something as dev, they can come in and get rid of all the chaff. They don't have to weed their way around and figure out, is it ready? Is this the right file? Because you can see even the page shows here that there are things inside of here that are ready for dev, and then each of the sections will actually denote ready for dev. Now, that's a little bit different than how Zeplin is going to go about it. When I'm working in Zeplin, if I was to go back to my project, I would grab all of the screens that I actually want to upload, like for instance, maybe these 3 screens. Let me get out of dev mode really quickly. And then I would open up the Zeplin plugin, and I would go ahead and I would export these out to the project that they are connected to. The first time you do it, it connects them to a project. And then when I come over to Zeplin, you can see I have a bunch of projects, but I have that project in particular pinned up here at the top. I can click on those, and now I can see each of the flows and each of the screens that are connected to my project. I can click on them, and I can get all of that same information, all of the measurements. I get all the code snippets, all the information over here on the right-hand side. But the difference is that I'm not worrying about Figma. I know that if I log into Zeplin as a developer, this is the single source of truth. These are the files that are ready. There's no possible way that I can think to myself, oh, are they still working on this? Because it's up inside of Zeplin. That creates an abstracted level, a secondary level that says, hey, we do all design work here, and then when it's ready, we push it up to Zeplin. Now again, which one of these is the right or wrong way? There is no right or wrong way. It's just what works best for you and your team. But that is a difference in how they handle this idea of the single source of truth. Another big difference between the two platforms is the idea of communication and collaboration, which has historically been tough when designers and developers try to communicate and collaborate in their teams. When I'm over in Figma's dev mode, really the primary means of collaboration or communication is through the commenting system. And so I'm here working on a design, and I can find the design I want to comment on or collaborate about, and I can hit C for comment, and I go ahead and start leaving a comment here. Now, leaving a comment is okay, and it starts to stack up in the right-hand comment section. We can do a few things here. We can search for types of comments. We can sort them. We can show resolved or only the threads that I've been in. We can hide the comments, and we can, mark this as unread, so it's active. We can resolve that comment. But historically, I've had a pretty tough time using Figma comments. I always end up having to fall back on Slack or email, or even writing sticky notes and leaving them directly here on the file. And, yes, while you can be in dev mode and connect things to a Jira ticket, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And sometimes things get a little bit lost in the sauce. So I'm not hating on Figma's dev mode for collaboration or for communication. I'm just saying it's a little bit tougher sometimes. Whereas if I come over to Zeplin, I think that there is something to be said about them recommending this collaboration process a little bit more. One of those things is when I jump into a file that I've been working on, I open that up. I can leave either annotations or comments directly here on the file. And so for instance, if I want to add a comment, I can just kind of click right here, and I can decide what do I want that to be. Now a comment is for feedback and questions, and they're visible when clicked, or an annotation is really at the end of the day for documentation, and it's always visible in the right panel. So I could, for instance, annotate something and say this icon is new, whatever that is. And I can select the type. Is it behavior, requirement, animation? Let's do tracking here, for instance. I can link to a component if I'm connected to a design system, and I can post this. Now I can go ahead and do another one here. I can press add a comment, and why don't we leave a comment here? And this time we'll actually do a comment. This needs to be removed again, and why don't we choose to mark it at like a different color like this, and go ahead and paste, and you can see it always lives over here in the right hand panel. Now that's pretty cool. I'm commenting, I'm annotating, I'm doing things directly here, and again, this is all the single source of truth, so I know all of this stuff is current and relevant. But what I also love here is that when we're collaborating and communicating, I don't have to worry about whether or not it is the single source of truth, because we also have version control happening here directly inside of Zeplin. Now, Figma does have version control, but the way that that collaboration works is not great. Version control in Figma is kind of like a time machine backup on a Mac. You're just going to roll back to a previous version and open it up. But here, I can actually see almost like a GitHub list of commits. Like for instance, we see that the segmented control got removed at one point, and then maybe the segmented control got added back. And I can actually see the differences between the two. So it can actually show me the diffs right there, which is kind of nice. And all of this happens when, for instance, I change something, like maybe in this case, I want to remove something else. Let's go back to the design mode. Like, let's say I'm the designer and I'm going to remove this section instead. I'm going to now grab this entire file and I'm going to re-upload it to Zeplin, opening up Zeplin. And you can see it's going to re-export it to the Prospero project, to the current project I'm working with. It's inspecting the layers. It knows that that file's already up there. So it's not going to create a new version. It's simply going to update the version control, and I can add a commit message. Removed the other thing. That's not very descriptive, but we press done and boom, it's exported, and there's my updates right there. I can roll back and I can see the other versions as we go back. And this is pretty nice for communication and collaboration. Now, one thing you are starting to see here is that Zeplin is a little bit more opinionated in the processes that it has established, whereas Dev Mode leaves it to you and your team to figure out how you want to do it. Maybe sticky notes inside the file are great. Maybe you want to use some sort of plugin. Maybe Slack and Jira ticket connection is the way for you. Well, over in Zeplin, it's a little bit more opinionated. And again, that may or may not work for you, but there's definitely, both of these are great solutions. It just really depends on what works for you and your team. The sharing is another difference between these two platforms. When I'm inside of Figma and I'm sharing, I'm basically sharing a link to the file and it's bringing people into Dev Mode, so they can see everything we've already talked about. Again, they can fly around and see all of those different elements here, and they can actually open up and connect with a bunch of different applications, and they can even open up VS Code, and they can start to grab each of these individual files and start to inspect them here directly inside of their editor. That way they can start coding immediately from here. Again, they have access because of the Figma integration with VS Code. It can bring them right to that, and if they're ever wondering to themselves, where is this actually found? They can actually find the link here or open this back up directly in Figma, and it's going to bring them right over to find that specific area of the file in case they need a little bit more information, which is pretty cool. That's not a bad piece of functionality there at all. Over in Zeplin, there's a little bit more that's happening with sharing, and maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's a little bit more. It kind of is just the difference that we're going to talk about now, but I can share the entire project here. I can click on individual files and I can share those up here as well. I can open them in app, or I could just share a link, copy a screen to the web link. We can actually view this in staging mode like this and exit out of there. It is always linked back to the production file in Figma. So again, same thing. It's going to open up Figma. It's going to kick me over to that exact spot. So there's some similarities there for sure. But then one of the things I really enjoy about this is that when we come back to the project itself, I can share a little bit more than just screens. I can actually, without having to link them somewhere else inside of Figma, I can actually grab multiple screens and start to add these to things like flows. When I jump over to flows, I can start to build out documentation on how one screen flows to another. And maybe we have this thing goes down here and we have this up here, and really start building out more complex flows for our design, which can be very, very helpful. They also have access to this shared style guide, and we can simply upload a different file. Like you can see here, I have an entire design system built for this project that's full of things like, you know, components and lists and charts and all the things that are made for the project. And we can just upload that and connect it with the project in Zeplin. And now they have access to a complete style guide. So I can click over here on the local style guide and I get all sorts of code snippets on the right-hand side. I get things like, you know, all the typography that's here. And then I get all of the different components with documentation. So again, when I'm sharing in either one of these platforms, it's really about what your team needs. Maybe you want to be able to share things in a single source of truth that has flows and components and style guides, and you can share different elements but always link back. Maybe that connection inside of something like VS Code and some of the tools that are there inside of Dev Mode actually work for you a little bit better. But I think either way, the point here is that you do need to be able to share, and the more information that you can share and the more contextually relevant information you can share, the better off you and your team are going to be. I want to end this video by talking about the creation of process. Both of these platforms encourage you to create process. They just go about it in a different way. First, let's talk about Figma and Dev Mode. If you're a team and you just want to stick in Figma, you want to use Dev Mode, there are a couple of tools that have been made available to you, like marking things ready for dev and like the commenting system, but a lot of the work of creating process is going to be placed on you. You want to use the commenting system? Do you want to rely on Slack and email? Do you want to leave sticky notes? Do you want to use the annotation system, or do you want to create full-on red lines? How do you organize your files to make sure that this is the actual working file that's ready for production? And how do you organize those within projects? All of that stuff you're going to need to come up with in your specific team. Even smaller teams working in larger organizations, there's going to be variance between those teams in how you organize and prep all these files and work together. Now, on the other hand, if you use Figma and you integrate Zeplin as a tool, it's going to infer on you. So there's a little bit more of that process that's been set in stone. For instance, creating a single project, connecting that project to a style guide or a design system, and then commenting and annotating on the individual screens. Then you're also going to have things like being able to collaborate there with version control and sending commit messages. You can even stage things and ask for approval. And so it's a little bit more of an abstracted layer where we're immediately saying, hey, if this is found on Zeplin, it is ready, it is production ready, go ahead and start working on it. Whereas there's a little bit of a question mark over in Dev Mode. Now, both of these are completely fine, and some people love creating their own process. They love the blank page, they love establishing their own rules, while other people would like at least a little bit more meat on the bone. They'd like some rules provided to them. Which one is right for you? Well, let's talk about that right now. If you're trying to figure out which of these solutions and platforms is right for you, what you really need to ask yourself is what's right for me and my team. Not what's right for other people, what are people talking about on Twitter, what's popular, or even what's more expensive or less expensive. Ask yourself what actually works for us. So you have to test these things out. Take the processes that you currently have, figure out what's working and not working. And from that, establish whether you need a little bit more rigidity, a little bit more process that's defined and created, or maybe a little more freedom, a little less of that rigidity. I think that if you're a team that is getting really big and you tend to double up and redo work because you don't know where things are stored and there's confusion, then having that layer of abstraction, that secondary layer of Zeplin, where we can say, hey, if it's here on Zeplin, it is ready to go. We can always roll back and look at previous versions. We can comment, annotate, document. Our developers can log in here. They never need to go into Figma. They're always just going to go here to find everything. We can connect style guides and design systems and put projects together. And it all feels really, really good and like one solid platform for development ready work. And maybe Zeplin plus Figma is the power team or the powerhouse for you. On the other hand, if you need a little bit more freedom and maybe you're really good at establishing process and something really works for you and you like that openness and freedom to do what works for you and your team as it evolves, then maybe locking yourself into a little bit more of a rigid platform is not for you. Maybe, you are a smaller team or a smaller shop. Maybe it's just you individually and you don't need this big kind of rigid system or structure. You like to just run and gun and that tends to work for you. Then I say go with it. Figma and their Dev Mode could be fantastic. I can see personally this working in a lot of different situations and contexts for different teams. Both are fantastic. And really, at the end of the day, it's what works for you. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell so you know when more design videos like this one come out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and check the description for some helpful links to all the resources I mentioned today. I hope you're having an amazing week. Hope you're designing amazing things, making amazing things, and creating process that works for you and your team. See you in the next one.